I'm Boase Beier, and I'm the translations editor for ARC Publications based in Todmorden in England. And this is Piotr Florczyk. Piotr, do you want to just say hello?
Yeah, hello, Jean. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very pleased that you could join in with this discussion. Piotr has published two books with us recently. And well, I'll tell you a little bit about Piotr. He's a poet, a translator from Polish. He was born in Kraków in Poland, but he actually lives in Southern California, and he's lived there for a very long time. So he translates from Polish. He's also an original poet. He's a critic and academic writer. And as I say, he's had these two publications very recently with ARC Publications. One of them is a collection of his translations of the poetry of Jacek Gutorow, who is a Polish poet. And this collection, called Invisible, was chosen by the Poetry Book Society as the translation choice recently. And Piotr has won a number of other awards and prizes for his translation. Now, what we're going to be talking about in the next 20 minutes or so is not that book, Invisible, the translations. It's another one. It's actually this one, which I hope people can see. Its title is Kraków Testimonies, and it's in the ARC chapbook series. This is original poetry, so it's not a translation. It's original poetry by Piotr. And these are original poems based on the testimonies of Holocaust survivors. So with the way we're going to do things in the, as I say, 20 minutes or so, Piotr is going to read a few poems from this collection, and then we're going to just have a brief discussion about the project that led to the poems and how they came about. So do you want to read a few poems, Piotr?
I would be happy to, of course. And let me just say a couple things. So again, thanks very much for having me. And thank you, Jean and Angela and Tony and everyone at ARC for publishing these two books, and especially the Kraków Testimonies. I should also say before I begin that there are 18 poems in the collection, and with the exception of the first two and the last one, all of them are untitled, or rather they are titled with Roman numerals. I'll read 4 of the poems selected from throughout the collection. 1. Full moon, 1, 2, 3, and more rusted cars bursting with flesh. Coal-fired engine sending smoke signals across plains. Each puff a breath in the sky disappearing. Da-dum, da-dum. The tracks have always been here. My compartment mates, keeping their eyes closed, pretend to dream. A pond, a sketched out villa that was once a hut, a barn, woods where a boy tries desperately to whistle a nursery rhyme on a blade of grass. This relic train for tourists is slow, but the arrival will be swift. These are the facts. The headlight, a scream, swallowing itself. 6. Whose, if not mine, are these words? Listening is a form of speaking, viewed from another angle, the far corner of the room where servers hum with the stories of survival. The room I worked in has become a story itself. The keyboard, the mouse, the screen in front of me. For every search word, either a place or name, an index of tributaries. Kraków kept showing up on every map. These words become mine the moment I let them go. 11. We was lucky. We was hungry. We go from this place away. We leave the house clean. Nothing left, not even a nail. Polish people give me a dog, a happy dog. I had nothing, just walls. Then they give me a couch. A nice man came. He tells me to run with what I have on my back. The skin, the blouse, unwashed in days. I didn't want to go to ghetto. I had a job, filling holes in roads. We danced when the Germans were shooting guns in the air. When we run from the city to the village for good, we was sad. Someone stole my dog. Then we saw one bird, another bird. We kept our armbands clean. 27. War wasn't bad, believe me. The aftermath was worse. We returned to our streets, homes, and stores. We searched for one another. Some were more damaged than others. When I knocked on the door of my old house, seeing a stranger's face flash in the window, I knew there'd be more trouble. An understatement now became my shibboleth. Telegrams went back and forth. Come home. The news spread fast. My dad, who had hid with Polish partisans and fought so bravely, didn't recognize me at first. There were more questions, more silence. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean these are very striking poems, and I'm sure that anybody listening to this will be struck by the idea that these are based on the testimonies of survivors of the Holocaust. And maybe you could start by saying a little bit about that. I mean, how did you come up with the idea for this project in the first place?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've always been a history buff. I majored in history as an undergrad and then briefly considered getting a PhD in history. And as a creative writer, a writing artist, I've always been interested in Holocaust literature, including your wonderful anthology here, and post-memory writing, post-Holocaust writing. All of these things have interested me. I've been a huge fan, to be more specific, of Charles Reznikov's volume Holocaust, for instance, the seminal volume based on the Nuremberg tribunal transcripts that he published. And one summer, I discovered that the University of Southern California, where I studied, had a fellowship program at the Shoah Foundation, or rather its scholarly arm, which is called the Center for Advanced Genocide Research. And I decided to apply, and in my application, I proposed to write a sequence of poems based on the Holocaust testimonies that are part of the Visual History Archive at USC. And lo and behold, I was awarded the fellowship. And it's very interesting also to point out, I think it's interesting, that they had never had a non-scholar apply for one of those fellowships. So they were really curious to see what a poet would come up with and how he would utilize the testimonies. So that's how the project got started for me.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting that the genesis of these things is always fascinating. And so you went to the archive, you found then these testimonies. Can you say a little bit about how you actually wrote the poems, you know, in response to the testimonies? Would you say they were in response to them, or how did that work? How did the actual poems come about, if it's possible to say that?
Yeah, I'm going to do my best trying to answer that question because it's a very complex, if not complicated question. So I spent 2 weeks working with the testimonies. There are over 60,000 of these recordings. And early on, I felt so overwhelmed by the sheer number of them that I decided that I would concentrate on the testimonies that had something to do with the city of Kraków, which is where I was born and raised. and lived till until I moved to the States to attend high school. And I basically was able to use a variety of key terms or search terms that I put into the computer. Kraków, of course, specific streets. So I searched by street names. I searched by landmarks. I searched by names of adjacent villages, villages that in many cases are now part of the city limits. In other words, I really wanted to find testimonies that concern places that I knew on a very personal level, either because I went to school nearby, or my parents and I and my sisters lived somewhere nearby. I wanted to make the project as personal as possible. But in terms of the actual writing, what I ended up doing is taking copious notes, and in doing so, try to answer all the W questions: who, what, when, where. I was very interested in what the people did before the war, how they responded to the terror unleashed by the Nazis all around them, how they went into hiding, if that's in fact what they did, who helped them and who did not assist them, for instance. Those are really, really important questions to me. And I literally copied down their statements, their phrasing. These testimonies, if some of our readers have not seen them, are structured in a very particular way. Most of them, by the way, were filmed in the States, and the person on camera had to answer these specific questions. Again, all the W questions, I would call them. And so I kind of tried to replicate the same thing. And so I would take down a phrase, and then I would take another phrase, take down another phrase and another phrase. And eventually what I ended up doing is adding in my own phrases, my own original writing, and creating this mosaic, if you will, this tapestry of a poem that included both, again, phrases, words, facts taken or lifted from the testimonies, plus my own original writing. And I should also say that what I wanted to do, or what I didn't want to do, is write poems that would come across as feasting in some way on the Holocaust and these personal stories. So with that in mind, I stuck to the facts as much as possible and did not raise the rhetorical effect, if you will, or the rhetorical temperature of these testimonies, and by extension my poems. I did not want to sensationalize the stories. I simply wanted to put them in a different context, to recontextualize them and see the facts, see the events in a different light.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting in terms of what you were doing. So you were answering questions of who, what, where, as you put it. But I mean, there's another question, of course, and that is why. I don't mean why were the Jews of Krakow victimized, because that's something that, I mean, in a way, of course, one could argue there is no answer to that, but that is what I'm asking you anyway. I mean, why did you decide to do this, in the sense of what was it that you wanted to do with it? Because, of course, we could always argue that poetry is just poetry and that we write poetry because we just write it. But I'm not sure I really subscribe to that view. You know, most writers, I think, write for a particular reason. At least they hope to have some particular effect. So what did you want to achieve with this project of writing these poems based on the testimonies? What did you hope for?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a very it's a very complicated issue, a very complicated process, utilizing or taking these testimonies and turning them into verse that, most people think of as something that's supposed to be beautiful and uplifting and inspirational, et cetera, et cetera. And in my case, what I really wanted to do is, with the events receding into the past more and more every single year, with fewer survivors among us, I really wanted to honor their sacrifice, their suffering. I also wanted to honor those who came to their aid, if that is in fact what happened. I wanted to also, I really thought of the project also as, I'm writing about my own city, the city I know or used to know very, very well. I lived there. My parents still live there, as a matter of fact. And I've always been interested in learning more about what happened to the city's Jewish population, because as we know, I'm of the age where I grew up when Poland was a communist country, and the authorities at the time really whitewashed that entire period. Most of us growing up did not know anything about the Holocaust, or at least we often heard that it wasn't the Jews who were singled out for genocide, that it was just Poles, right? Everybody was thrown into the same category. And here, as an adult, I began to learn that no, that wasn't in fact the case. It was the opposite, that it was really the Jewish people who were singled out for genocide, and yet others as well, of course, the Roma people, Polish people, Slavs, etc., of course. But we have to separate the two victims, if you will. And so I wanted to write about that as well. And all of those things that contributed to that took place in the city that I knew so well on such an intimate level. And I think in a way, I also wanted or hoped that the project would be a departure from history books. Throughout the collection, I used the phrase, "These are the facts." It's very important to me that the poems be filled with factual information lifted from the testimonies. But at the same time, I wanted those facts to perhaps stand out or be looked at in a different context, right? In the context of the arts, and how, we hope that the arts can give us a different avenue, or a different gateway into history, and discussing things that are horrific and painful to so many people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you talk about the facts, because I mean, this is something I know that you've also read W.G. Sebald, or Max Sebald, as I know him, and many people know him. And this is one of the things that he always said in his writings. Literature that doesn't deal with facts is not worthy to be called literature. So that raises the interesting question then, of course, of why literature? Why not simply document? Why not simply publish the testimonies? And why the poetry? I mean, that probably would take too long to discuss all that. But it's a very interesting question, of course, isn't it? Absolutely. And I mean, as you say, you want to reach out to different audiences, people who maybe find an approach to the knowledge that they don't have through poetry, which they perhaps wouldn't find through a history book, because, well, people don't always read history. They don't always read poetry either. But people don't always read history because it can seem maybe as though it doesn't affect them or isn't relevant to them, because history is history, whereas poetry is always very much in the present, isn't it? So I suppose that's another reason.
Yeah, that's definitely it. Yeah, the idea that, especially the Holocaust, a lot of people think they've heard it all, right? They know everything about it there is to know, and that's not the case at all. We know that's not the case at all.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, that's very interesting, and I think we've just about our time is up. So just to reiterate for people listening that this book is the Kraków Testimonies. It's published by ARC Publications. If you Google ARC Publications, you can get to the website and you can then find the book. Well, thank you to Piotr for joining me in this discussion and the reading, and thank you to everybody for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Gina. I really appreciate it. And thanks very much to everyone for tuning in.
Thanks. Bye.